New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Hello and welcome to Growing Edge Live. I'm Allie Benjamin, and this is my partner, my friend, Diana Soroka. Hi, Diana.
Hello, Allie. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're doing a session, another Her Wings Appeared session. And for those of you that don't know what Her Wings Appeared is or what Growing Edge is, if you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad that you found us. I don't believe there are any mistakes, and that we, you, us, we're here together on purpose, that something led you here. And I know there'll be something that you hear today, or maybe you experience or feel inside yourself today that will make a difference in your life. So I'm glad you're here. And for those of you that join every week, I'm so glad that you came back. I know that you'll enjoy this conversation that Diana and I are going to have. And we're going to be talking about our book, our upcoming book, which is growing and expanding. It's growing wings and it's expanding, taking flight. And the title is Her Wings Appeared. And I'm going to turn it over to Diana for a moment so she can tell you a little bit about this book and the conversation we're going to have today, where we're going to go. And we always end up going places I don't expect, but we have some ideas of where we're going today.
Yes, we do. So the book, Her Wings Appeared, is a compilation of our stories and other women's stories. And it's around a shift. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Each story is around a shift that someone made, a woman made, that changed her story, changed how she saw things and how she interacted with the world. So the shift for me is like a moment when you can no longer honestly tell yourself the story that you've been using for a while to stay the same, to stay in the comfort zone, the one that makes you feel okay. I think also that the shift is when something inside you goes from this is fine to this isn't all right. And even if you don't act yet, you can't unknow that. So it's like the shift, the seed has been planted for a shift.
Yeah.
So today we're going to do something a little different. Allie and I talked about, we're going to kind of share an overview of a few of the stories that we have that are going to be in our book. And I'm just going to tell a little bit about the story, and Allie's going to ask me some questions that will help all of us to understand fully what the shift was in that story. And she's going to ask me some questions about it. I'm going to answer, and then we're going to discuss them. Is that your understanding it, Allie?
Yep, that's what I'm ready for. So as Diana said, we've got some of the stories. We won't be sharing whose stories these are, just some very sort of general, basic ideas. And then we'll dive in a little more deeply. And our hope is that you can recognize yourself in some of these stories, that you might consider some of the shifts or turning points that happened in your life. Maybe you haven't really been aware of of them. But something you'll hear today might help you to see, oh, I made a shift there. I became a little different, or saw things differently, or acted differently. And that created a ripple out effect in my life. And so when we can listen to stories, hear each other's stories, we can then sometimes see ourselves a little bit more clearly, or others in our lives more clearly. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what stories you selected, Diana.
Yeah. And I just want to add to what you said too, because I think it's really interesting that we often don't know that we have shifted, or that something shifted when we're in the moment. It's not till later that we look back and we're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's when my wings appeared. That's the shift. And that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and that brings up this whole premise of wings appearing. It's really moments when there has been a shift, or we elevate our consciousness or our energy or our intellect, or something happens, we change our behaviors. So these wings are really talking about shifts, turning points, changes, elevations in consciousness. And so that's what you'll hear when we use that phrase, her wings appeared, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm gonna move on to the first story. And at this point, we're in the editing process, and this story right now is called The Key on the Counter. And this is a story about a woman who was married to her kid's dad. And from the outside, it looked like she had a good, full life. But underneath, things were, I'm just going to say, inconsistent. And she slowly found herself adjusting who she was, changing who she was to keep the peace. So that's the overview of this story. So you want to ask me a question?
I do. I have some questions for you. So Diana, in this story, what were you, or the woman that this story is about, what was she tolerating right before that moment that she knew that she shouldn't have been?
Well, in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and admit that this is one of my stories. I was tolerating instability, emotional inconsistencies, the ups and downs of a relationship that's gone wiry. And that all that instability and the inconsistency had become normal for me and my family. So I was just always constantly reading the room and softening my words, trying to keep the peace in the family. So that's what I was tolerating, not being fully myself.
Yeah, I think I see that not only in myself, but other women that I've had the honor of sitting in circle with or having a counseling session with. Those moments when we alter ourselves or shift ourselves to live up to someone else's expectations, or our perceived idea of what someone else expects us to be. Yeah. And when we do that, it's so uncomfortable. But like you said, we become used to that. It becomes like the normal, and we don't realize that we've altered ourselves into a different shape or a different, mood to keep the peace or what have you. So what lie were you telling yourself to stay comfortable?
Well, I would tell myself that this is just how marriage is, and yet there's a give and the take, and staying in it would be better for the kids. I definitely had that thought. And even though there was something strong in me telling me that it wasn't right. It wasn't right. And I didn't feel true to myself. I I kept telling myself that this is what I needed to do because that's what went, how I was raised. That was the lie that I was raised with, is that you get married and you're in it for life. And so I was desperately trying to hold on to that, belief and make it work.
Yeah, when I hear you saying that, I feel sad. I feel
Mhm.
sad for that younger version of you. I feel sad for all the times that I did that, and for all the times others have done that too. That we're willing to almost build up a case for why we should, these lies we tell ourselves are almost our justifications for, not really living our own version, our
Mhm.
own desired version of our life. So
Right.
what did it cost you to finally see the truth?
Um, well, it cost me the ability to keep pretending that this version of love was enough. Um, it cost me that picture of the family that looked whole and intact. I that society was telling me was what a family should look like, and that it was that was being successful as a wife and mother. Um, the identity, like, of the one who holds the family together, like, it cost me that part of who I at the mo at that during that time, I was proud of, like, "Oh, I can keep this family together. I can make this work." And but somewhere along the line, somewhere along the way, I somehow valued the marriage over being true to myself
Mm,
and being true to my and even my kids and everyone else. I wasn't being honest. And so that's what it cost me.
mm. Yeah, I can see how that, over time, that reorganizing yourself into a different shape becomes that new normal. And then when you finally, and I'm not speaking just to this story, but in general, when we finally see that we've created roles, we've
Mhm.
created images, we've created truths for ourselves that take a lot of energy to keep going. And when we've had enough, when we can't finally begin to question ourselves and the validity of these stories we've told ourselves, or these truths that we've fed ourselves, that we've believed in order to keep the marriage or the situation or the relationship intact, that can be very difficult to let go of those parts of us that we invested so much time and energy into.
Yeah.
um, and I would imagine that can bring up a whole lot of things like shame and blame, being hard on ourselves.
Mhm.
So it's a whole journey. These kinds of shifts can take time, and they require sometimes help. And I know that you and I both are very fond of women's groups, circles, supporting each other. And so I think if you're hearing this and you're beginning to see some of these things might be true for you, I want to sort of underscore the importance of having a good friend to talk to, or getting help if your things start to shift, or you find yourself at a turning point like this. So how long, Diana, did you hesitate after the moment before you actually acted?
Well, I kind of want to talk a little bit about um, what, because this is an important part of this process, what I was getting out of staying in,
Mm,
in this situation, because it's important to realize that and take responsibility for our own thoughts and feelings and actions. That's a important part of being able to work through the process and to be able to come to that point where you spread your wings. So for me, because I've looked at this so many times, of course, um, I I know that security was part of it. I felt secure. So that's what I was getting out of staying. That family being intact, not having to face the the weight of breaking my family apart, of leaving a man that I felt like I still loved.
mm.
And so there's a lot in this for me too, so understanding that and being ready and willing to release it is a big part of moving forward in the in making a change. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back over some of the instances where I had to leave. And sometimes that timeline could be weeks, months, years. It can take us, different amounts of time based on, what we're dealing with. There's financial concerns, there's emotional concerns, there's other people's lives that will be affected. And so some of these big choices can not only take time, but there's a lot to consider,
Right.
as we navigate it.
Yeah, and so your question on how long did she hesitate, that right there kind of addresses some of that. And for me, it was a long time. Well, first of all, I had to feel like I gave it every chance. I did everything I could before I left. So, going through all the cycles of trying to fix something that's broken, leaving, coming back, those long, deep talks with one another, very honest, open talks, and thinking that you got through, but before long, you found out you didn't, bargaining, all of the things. So it was a long time for me before I came to the point that I was ready to move.
So it's been some time now, I know for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's on the other side of that? Because a lot of people hearing this might be thinking, wow, that, it's not, doesn't sound so easy. And it's not always easy. So what's the reward on the other side of making such a big shift or embracing a turning point that's that significant and there's children involved?
Right. So for me, I felt like I needed to make, to be responsible because I had the kids, and I wasn't trained, I wasn't educated in a way to just go out and start making a living like what my kids were used to or what I was used to. So I kind of prepared myself somewhat so we wouldn't be on the streets anyway. So um I'm moving on to our next question because this is kind of into that. I focused on being a really good mom. I focused on like not hiding things from my kids. If it was out there, if it needed to be spoken, I talked about it. I answered their questions. I worked on myself because I knew I was part of this equation. And I went to school. I went to school so that I could get a better job. I set boundaries, but then I also broke them. I pulled back on them. I lifted them. So it was kind of a cycle. And I just kept hoping that things would shift without me having to make that hard decision.
Mm.
Um, Yeah, there was a part of me that really hoped that he would make the decision, but that wasn't going to happen. So that's where I was on that. Kat, now does that relate to you at all?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Um, Very similar to my story with my first husband, the father of my three children. It's an enormous decision, and I can relate to, you know, reorganizing who I was in order to make sense of the relationship that I was actually having, compromising my values, um, living out of integrity with my values,
Mhm.
and eventually getting to a point where the unacceptable was unacceptable.
Right.
And that took time. That took, for me personally, going to Al-Anon, learning to find my voice, to actually hear other people that have been through similar situations. All of that gave me a better perspective on what I was really doing
Mhm.
in staying, and how that could potentially be worse for my children than, you know, to stay with that situation. And I'm not saying yours was the same as mine, but with my situation there was addiction issues, and my children became, well, myself and my children became my priority. And I realized that, just like they talk about when you're on a plane and talk about the oxygen masks, I realized I had to give myself the oxygen. Or like you talked about education, I went to school, I fed myself, I nourished myself so I could then feed my children and be a good example. And on the other side of that, I felt liberated. I felt more confident in my own abilities. I learned to trust myself. Um, and I too had to lower my, you know, we didn't have as much money. We had to, you know, have a different lifestyle, and all of that. The price was, it was all worth it.
Right.
And so looking back, I'd say it was, you know, although it was sad, it was also the best decision for everyone involved.
Right. And so I think that what finally prompted me to take action was that same thing, the realization that no longer, uh, that I was no longer at all in a healthy relationship. I was not true to myself, just like you said. I wasn't living in integrity, and that it was doing more harm to staying than leaving. And there was a straw that broke the camel's back for me, but that's not what's important. What's important is that because of everything else that happened, because of those thoughts and those feelings I had been having, um, that kicked me. This one moment kicked me in the behind and prompted action for me to face him, tell him what I was doing, do it. And yeah, for me, that first year was hard. It was hard, but um, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I was doing the best thing for myself and my kids, even though it was hard. And yes, there were moments I wanted to go back. I wanted to run back and feel safe again. But I knew that wasn't the right thing for me to do. So
Yeah. Well, why don't we share one more story and then we'll take a break in a few minutes. But I want to get this next story up and out. So what's our next story?
okay, our next story is called "Standing in Her Integrity," and this woman returned to her home to care for her dying father. And in the middle of all of that, she was faced with this lifelong pattern with her brother. She loved him so deeply. They had always been so close, but she never fully held a boundary with him. So that's what the story is. Do you want to get started on the questions, or do you want to talk
Yeah.
about it a little more? Okay.
So what do you believe that this woman was tolerating before that moment that she knew she shouldn't have?
Well, she was tolerating this lifelong pattern of bending herself for him, for allowing his behavior, softening her boundaries, and prioritizing love over being true to herself. And in this case, it was her brother who was an alcoholic. So that kind of helps you get a little bit of the picture.
Mm-hmm. So what lie was she telling herself in order to stay comfortable with it within that uncomfortable situation?
She was telling herself a lie that had been told to her, that loving him, family was everything. That loving him meant letting him in to everything, being there for him, always being available. And even when it crossed her own boundaries, her own limits, she couldn't hold the line without the feeling that she was going to lose him. And that's a big thing too. That thought stopped her. It hurt her just too much. That's what stopped her before. That was a lie.
Mm-hmm. And how long did it take for her? How long did she hesitate before she finally acted? And I remember reading this story, by the way.
Yeah. Yes, it took her decades of not holding the boundary, even when she knew better. So it was really hard for her. So yeah. And
Yeah,
I can
go
really
ahead.
relate to this too. I can relate to this story as well. Having we have addiction in our family. So this is a familiar story to me. So how about you? Does it sound familiar?
Yeah, I what struck me about this story is that this woman was in a situation where she was back in her family home taking care of a loved one that was ill. And isn't it interesting that that was the moment she chose to assert a boundary? Because it seems like a very complicated and difficult time to do that, because there's a lot at stake. It's not just her and her brother. There's also a parent that's ill. And so putting your foot down or having a moment of a turning point amid a crisis or amid a difficult situation, that can be very challenging, but also it can be the perfect time because there's a lot at stake here. And so I think that's what I see when I read the stories here for all of the women. You get a sense of what was at stake in that turning point moment, that moment where you faced your fear or spoke up or stopped accepting unacceptable behavior, or whatever it was that was the change, was that asserting your boundary, that it potentially could be amidst a crisis. And I've seen this, and what I know as I've done it myself, like it's never, well, I don't know if this is completely true, but it's never as bad as you think. Like, it feels like the whole world's going to crumble if you mess things up, or you disturb the peace, or there's a turning point or something. But when you're on the other side of it, you can see that, okay, yeah, that was hard, that was difficult, but it needed to happen. And maybe the fire needed to be that hot in order for me to make that decision at that particular time. And then afterwards, everything changes, because you've stepped across an invisible boundary and you've become more of yourself in the speaking up or the drawing the line or crossing the line or doing something different.
Right. I agree. And for her too, it was And I see, like you said, with lots of women, it's when our emotions are heightened and when we're in protection mode. A lot of time when we're protecting someone else is when when our courage steps up, for sure.
Exactly. We are at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a really short break, and Diana and I will be back with story number 3. See you in a minute.
Please help us say thank you to all of our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Center for Spiritual Living United Life, Sunshine Cathedral, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Universal Joy Center, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Home Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. On behalf of New Thought Media Network, thank you, and please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, come be you.
And we are back. So Diana, was there anything you wanted to add to the last story, or should we move on?
Yeah, I just have just a little bit, because we really didn't go into the story too much, but I wanted to let everyone know that the moment that she made her move was on her family's front porch, and it was a time when she said no. And she said it with authority. She didn't take it back, even though her heart was broken. And so it was a big moment for her. But I also want to say that the shift wasn't with what she said when she said no that night. That was not the shift. It was when she realized that she could love her brother deeply and still not let him in. That was the shift. So,
wow, yeah. These shifts really bring light to the dimension of the impact of speaking up, or asserting a boundary. It's not just about that action. It's about what happens inside. It's about really entering into a whole new story, writing a whole new story for yourself when you do something, when you stand up to someone in your life that's so significant, so important. Yeah. All right. So what's our next story?
Okay, so our next story is not quite as dramatic as the other two. It's titled "She Loosened Her Grip." And this woman was moving through the early stages of an empty nest. She was watching her children build their lives and discovered that they, just those feelings that came with no longer being centered around her. She was feeling a little bit neglected, and she had this kind of uncomfortable mix of loss, love, and displacement, that came with it. So it's kind of around the empty nest syndrome type of thing. And I chose it because I think so many of us experience this.
Yeah, those moments of change and transition. So I'll ask you the questions as it relates to this story. So what was she tolerating right before that moment,
Well,
that she knew that she shouldn't be?
okay. Well, she questioned herself for sure. She was tolerating this quiet grief, this grief of losing, and also a little bit of guilt and shame because she knew her kids were spreading their wings and going out on her own. But also that insecurity of, being the center, this absolute center of her children's lives. Everything, she knew everything they were doing. She was managing everything. And then she was also trying to be upbeat and absolutely fine about it. So there's all these different things going on. So those are the things that were coming up, and she was tolerating and trying to figure out about this place she was.
And so in there's certain things that she tells herself to stay comfortable within that.
Well, first of all, she was telling herself that she shouldn't feel this way. I should not feel this way. Good mothers don't feel jealous or left out or uncertain about where they fit in. So that was a big thing. That was the lie that she was telling herself, because we do have feelings. It's natural for us to feel those things. But also we want to work through them, right? We don't want them to guide our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. That could
Right.
get us in trouble.
Yeah, I think humans are complex. We have many different parts of us. And especially when we're confronted with a transition or a change, an empty nest, we start to see those different parts of us can come to the surface. And that part of her, and I can relate to this, having been through the empty nest syndrome, that part, that role that I used to play, that the woman in this story used to play, of being the manager of their lives, and knowing, kind of being at the center and knowing what was going on, and that can be hard to let go of. But when those feelings arise, those, that hurt, that feeling left out, that whatever it is, I can see that women are pretty good at, and men too, I'm sure, but in this instance, we're talking about women, that we can suppress those parts of us that are feeling sad or angry or confused. And I think many of us, we can get busy or do whatever it takes to distract ourselves from really feeling our feelings. And I think that these days, and especially through this book, we want women to see that we are multifaceted beings, so we have many parts, and denying our sadness or our fear or our confusion or our anger only exacerbates that feeling of unease or that feeling of uncertainty. But in embracing it, having a look at that sadness or having a look at the fear or allowing the emotions to come up without overtaking can be very liberating too, because many of us have been conditioned to not look at, to suppress those feelings. And so we don't get the full impact of really moving through those feelings or moving through that energy in a new way. Right. Because, that's what these threshold moments provide us, the opportunity to move through these thresholds, these shifts, these energy changes in a more spiritually appropriate, aligned, integrated way.
Right. And a lot of us don't know how to do that. But the first step is facing that feeling, that fear, that jealousy, that guilt, that whatever it is facing that. And then, being curious about it, looking at it a little more, because the cost of not doing those things, we're seeing that, because we're seeing that in our world right now, where we're hearing about a lot of adult children who are separating from their parents. And a lot of it is because parents, we forget, we stifle those feelings, but they come up. They come up with little comments we make, or guilt that we, you know, place on our kids for not being there for us. So there's definitely a reward for looking at yourself, for being a little more self-aware, um, and allowing yourself to feel, the feelings, and to look at them and make your way through. It's a journey. It's a journey, and it's not easy sometimes, but getting on the other side is, like Ali said, it's like um liberation. It is. So, yeah.
So in this story, and I know we don't want to give everything away, but what was something that this woman realized? What was, a wings moment for her?
She realized, that her children would love her and hold her in a place of value, no matter if she wasn't in their everyday life. That she was loved, and nothing was going to break that. It's the shift is when not, it's not when her children moved on, it's when she stopped trying to hold them in the same way, and allowed the relationship to change. Instead of that, it's still a mother-child relationship always, but it kind of morphs to maybe a friend relationship. And when we allow that and get value in it, and adore it, and be grateful for it, everything changes. So, but sometimes we don't, and that's a big thing. That we actually have a story. One of our stories is about a woman whose children separated from her, and she has to live with that. So these stories, they're everyday stories that we all go through, we all deal with. Probably every story in this book I've dealt with to some degree myself. So I think that all of us will relate and learn and laugh and see ourselves in some of it, for sure.
Yeah, and cry sometimes. I shed a few tears reading some of these stories. And I know that, as we talk about the empty nest, and we realize that roles change, I think, having a group of women, which is really what we're finding that is emerging from this anthology of stories, is there's a group of women here. And we can see this group growing. And yes, we don't all live in the same town, but we are connected through these commonalities, through these stories. And with this one of, shifting out of the role of the mother, that is sort of central to the family's life, and developing a new relationship with our children. And there's such a natural sort of evolutionary tale here that once we see it, once we loosen our grip on that role, and our children loosen the grip on holding us in that place of mother, and we start to develop a new friendship, a new relationship, a new relational conversational style, we start to see that there's an opportunity to create something brand new in terms of a relationship, and take it to that next level. And maybe the old, relationship we had with our kids when they're in their, young, and when they're in their teens, and when they're in their early adult years, now has a more of a natural feel and vibe and energetic to it. as all the people involved, mother, father, children, grandchildren, start to come into themselves in their own right. And so there's actually great liberation as we allow ourselves to morph and change and evolve into the people we are at whatever age. And I think that's what these stories have also shown me, that there's more to learn about ourselves at whatever age or stage we're at. And by listening to these stories, reading these stories, hearing these stories, we are, again, we're building greater self-awareness and more love and compassion for those that we walk this incredibly beautiful life with. So we have time for maybe two. I don't know how many we have left. How many stories do we have left?
Well, that was our third story, but I have a thought. I know I have a particular shift that I can share. How about you, though? Do you have a shift you like to share?
Well, why don't you go first, and maybe that will spark something in me, because I definitely have been going through a lot of shift lately.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Well, I'm going back to a time when I was a school leader, because this one really stuck out with me. And one of my bosses, he had this pattern of belittling me, and it was always in front of other people. And it wasn't true, and it definitely wasn't appropriate. But I let it go on longer than I should have. And part of me was like, I felt like I didn't fully hold my own value. And I won't go into that, where I was at that time, but I had done a lot of work, and I was really capable of, this role in my life, but I still held on to a few beliefs that I wasn't good enough. So this particular moment, we were having a meeting in our school, because I worked with schools, and there was about 20 people, and they were leaders of our city. The press was there, and we were there celebrating and planning for this large grant that I had written and secured for our school. And right in the middle of this meeting, he did it again. He made comments that were really dismissive and made everybody in the meeting uncomfortable. And something really clearly shifted in me, I guess, in that meeting with everyone there, knowing the work that I put in on this grant. I realized right then that this wasn't okay, and that I was participating by staying quiet. Now, fortunately for me, I didn't make a scene. I didn't do anything in front of everyone, but he left the meeting early. And so I excused myself right after him, and I followed him out. And I looked him right in the eye, and I said, "You will not speak to me like that again. If you have an issue with me, you can address it with me appropriately and privately." And it wasn't like emotional or aggressive, but it was assertive and clear. And that changed everything. It changed everything. And it wasn't because he became a different person, but it was because I did. That was the shift. That's when my wings appeared. So that was when I kind of stopped telling myself that it was fine, that it was okay. And I recognized that by allowing it, I was saying it was okay. I was giving that indication that it was okay. So the wing moment, or the moment that I shifted, it wasn't when he spoke to me, but it was when I stopped agreeing with it. So that was a big one for me. So that was like 35 years ago.
So how was he different after that moment?
It was like he honored my boundary. He was like, he wasn't going to push me. So occasionally he would cross the line a little bit. I would just look him in the eye, and that was it. he just backed down. I don't know how it happened, but it was a very good lesson for me. It helped me so many times. And ever since that day, people have always said to me that it's very, that the way I hold myself in a room asks for respect, and I get it. And I think it was just that experience.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful story to hear. And it's the sense I get as I'm listening to you and getting a sense of who you became after that. I'm just going to look at the comments here because I'm wanting to make sure I didn't have them turned on. I'm getting a sense of who you became after that. And I'm thinking of all those little turning points that I've made, those times I spoke up, those moments that I stopped accepting unacceptable behavior. Or I think about the 4 agreements, I stopped taking things personally, or I stopped making assumptions that, people would do such and such or think such and such. And those moments when I come to the edge of, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to say something. I'm going to do it differently. What happens is we become more ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We become more grounded in ourselves and more honest with the world. Like there's this sense of opening up to a deeper, wider, broader dimension of life where it's more real, it's more peaceful, it's more enjoyable, because the energy that it takes to keep some of these old stories going, or to go along to get along, or people please, or not give your opinion when it's asked for, or whatever it is, keeps us in patterns and behaviors that can be very inauthentic. And so I think all of the stories in our book and all of the personal moments and experiences I've had and shared some of them here, and you've shared some of yours, there's this overarching sense that we give ourselves permission to be ourselves unapologetically, to become more sovereign in our own lives, to have greater agency. And with that, also, what I have noticed is I have access to greater intuition. Like when I'm actually, not trying to play the game of people pleasing or whatever the thing is, then I have greater access to those wiser parts of me that my life requires in order for me to show up as my most fully orbed, fully developed, goddess self, which I think all of these stories help us to get a sense of the woman behind the scenes, or the woman that was, keeping those wings clipped because of the decisions she was making, or because of the, not asserting the boundaries, or speaking up, or facing her fears, or letting her light shine. And by the way, those are some of the chapter titles. We get a sense of women's empowerment. Not just women, but anyone can apply these same things to their lives. No matter what you're doing, where you are, what sex you are, it's the same. But because Diana and I are women, and because this is the lane that we've been swimming in for so long, is supporting other women, our stories are about women. So is there things that we've left unsaid, or things that have come up for you since we've had this deep dive conversation into these stories and your story?
I know that all of us, everyone who's listening, they've had moments when they shifted, when they saw things differently, when they grew from an experience, and all those moments add up to uh, becoming the goddess that we are. Each of us, we are goddesses. We have various times through our lives when our wings appear, and sometimes it's for a moment, sometimes for a long period of time. And becoming aware of who you are, and especially through the shifts and the changes that you've made in your life, um, well, they help me to understand myself fully and to value who I am. I've been through a lot. I've lived a lot. I've learned a lot, and I was open. I was open to being the best, version of myself I could be. And I think that that's what we all need to be aware of, because when we are aware that, well, it helps. Being aware of myself helps me to be aware of others, that to have more empathy, to have more appreciation for what other women go through, and to say me too, me too, because I all these stories, like I said, I can say me too for one part of them or another.
Yeah. Something that is coming up for me as we wind up on the end of this episode is the importance of being vulnerable. And one of the thresholds I had to cross was just that, being more open, sharing my story. I grew up thinking that I could keep a lot of things inside, that was a good way of coping with stressors or uncertainty, or was that I needed to handle this by myself, that it wasn't safe to admit that I didn't know, or admit that I needed help, or share some of the troubles I was having. But very early on in, I talked about my first marriage and going to Al-Anon. I realized that actually being open, being vulnerable, sharing when I'm having a problem, or not being so, growing up in England kind of taught me this. The culture there is to, keep calm and carry on, and you don't talk about things, you don't share your dirty laundry in front of others. And so, all these cultural subtle messages kept me thinking I was having to handle things by myself. But what I have found through rooms like in Al-Anon, or sharing stories for this book, and I share 5, 6 stories that are deeply personal, and I know you have too. And this was a stretch for me. I always thought that I was being open, but when I had the opportunity, when Diana invited me to start writing some of these stories, I had to really stretch my wings and really start to open up. And I realized how much I kept on the down low, or how much that, I thought I didn't need to reveal because that would say something about me that I wasn't capable, or when we're open, when we're available, when we're ready, when we're willing to look at our stories, examine our stories, maybe even rewrite our stories, something happens, something magical happens. And that's what this book is about. It's about moments when women came to that edge, when the status quo was no longer an option, when they were willing to spread their wings and do it differently and speak up and face their fears. Everything changes. That's what these stories about. That's what this book is about. And Diana, thank you so much for helping me today to move through this conversation. Do you have a final word for our audience?
I know. I think you just wrapped it up so nicely. I love the piece about vulnerability and how much we learn about ourselves as we open up and share. So
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here, be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. And thank you everyone for being here today, here at The Growing Edge. And if you'd like to have more information about us, you can go to growingedgelive.com, and we will see you next week here on New Thought Media Network, our wonderful production stage. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge.